welcome to our podcast on project sponsorship. I'm Andy Murray, the Executive Director of the Major Projects Association. I'm joined today by Carol Deveney. Welcome, Carol.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me, Andy.
So, Carol, those people who are, regularly involved in project sponsorship probably know who you are. You don't need too much of an introduction. But for those who are listening into this podcast and want to know more about project sponsorship, a little bit of background on Carol. So, Carol is the Managing Director of Sea Change International Consulting. It's the company you formed a few years ago, Carol, to advance a number of things around major projects and sponsorship. And before that, you had a number of roles, but one that sort of brought you into the spotlight for project sponsorship was when you were head of sponsorship for Network Rail, and I think that's when we first met through the APM governance special interest group when you were in that role. And notably for this podcast, Carol, you've just launched a book, or it's just been published, called How to Sponsor Projects, which is right on topic for our upcoming seminar on the 13th of June in Manchester on Fit for Future sponsorships. So hope I've done that your background justice there, Carol, from that introduction.
Yes, indeed you have. And yeah, thank you for mentioning the book. It's been an exciting week. I've talked about it for long enough and finally written it and published it.
So, Carol, I want to start off talking about your book, if I may, and then we'll just link that to the themes we've got in the seminar that's coming up, because I think they really do align. And partly, if I explain that the reason why we've got Carol for this podcast ahead of the seminar, we normally do our podcast after our seminars, is that Carol's going to be on holiday touring the railways of Italy when we're holding our event. So, Carol, as someone sort of long-standing background in the railway sector, are you a glutton for punishment, or is this like the classic busman's holiday?
I mean, it's a bit of both, and it actually ties in really nicely to one of the things we are talking about. So you probably know, Andy, that my company have a policy, and we have since day one, that we do not fly domestic in the UK. That's our sustainability policy and our commitment to role modelling what we believe in, which is public transport as a great equaliser and a great sustainability option. The holiday is part trip, part indulging my love of railway journeys, and also part trialing. Could we actually extend that policy to say we're actually not going to fly domestic European either? So this is
Brilliant.
I have to do it first before I ask anyone else to do it. So that's partly what we're doing on this trip, is seeing actually how viable is it, what is the business impact, because we reckon we can mitigate any impacts, but we have to understand what they are first of all.
And a bit of a theme that perhaps we'll come on to later, because when we're thinking about the impact on projects, often it doesn't require us to spend more or do more. It just requires us to think more in terms of how we achieve the same objective in a more sustainable or more impactful way. But before we go on to that, let's talk about your book. So why did you write it? What prompted you to write a book on how to be a project sponsor? Or sorry, how to sponsor projects. Let me get the title right.
Yep, how to sponsor projects. I mean, I wrote it for three main reasons. The first reason is really, I was a project manager, and then I became a sponsor, or had sponsorship thrust on me. I'm never sure which one it was. And when I had been a project manager, and anything else that I've done, I like to read all the texts, look at what all the different ways you can do a thing are, and then figure out the way that works for me by trialing some things. So I thought, well, I'll get on the internet and I'll buy the sponsor books and I will read from there. And it was my first step in the realization that as a profession, we are so underserved. There were no books, there were no major texts for me to read. There wasn't very much in any of that's changed a bit now. And there wasn't much in any of the professional institutions that really said to me, this is what good looks like, and this is the standards you should aim to hold yourself to. And it was about 2 years before I actually got a little tiny handbook on a training session that said, I think it was called The Role of the Sponsor, or Sponsor's Handbook. And it was fabulous because I had been doing a job for 2 years, and I read the book, went on the course and realised I'm doing some of my old job and some of the new one. And now I know what sponsorship is. So it's always been in my head that I would write a book about it, probably from about 5 to 7 years in, because you can't write the book until you've, had some of the experience. And the second reason is, I think I really want us to start that debate for sponsors. You know, there's not one project management book that we all follow. I would love it if someone read it and said, well, that's not what I would have written in the book. I'm going to write my own book. And we create a lot of text that people can read a variety, choose the things that work for them, because not everything I propose is going to work for every person or every project. So we need to create that diversity. And sometimes putting some things out that might be provocative, even just by saying, this is what I call best practice, for someone else to read it and go, oh no, best practice is this. That's how you start a debate, and cognitive diversity is what will drive us forward as a profession, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, we can't improve on something if we don't know what the something already is, and that's I really like that idea of just putting it out there so that people can add to it and keep the best practice moving forward. I loved your introduction, by the way, in your book, where you sort of expand upon what you just mentioned there in terms of when people feel that when they're first asked to sponsor a project, it can feel very vague and ambiguous, and then when they sort of scratch around to find out what it means, they're told, well, it's not being a project manager, it's go and get the money, and then sort of and then leave it to the project. Oh, by the way, but you've got to keep some oversight going on, or maybe not, and it was all the different things. It's almost like there isn't it's almost the first rule of Fight Club, so the first rule of Sponsor Club is there is no sponsor, or there's no guide or playbook for the sponsor. And that ties in really well to the seminar that we've got coming up, which is we got a number of parts to it, but the first part is for us to present some findings from a study that the association commissioned, that was done by Professor Carl Gavin and his team at Alliance Manchester Business School, and it looked exactly what you've been talking about, Carol, which is how is sponsorship defined in the various sort of bodies of knowledge and elsewhere, and Carl and his team, or I think it's principally Carl, has captured something like 6,000 items of literature that are either reference sponsor or more importantly should reference sponsor but didn't, and so and the sort of conclusions that Carl has reached from that, without sort of revealing what will be presented on the 13th of June, is exactly as you said. It's not very well defined, and in fact there's very little. Literally, he found only a handful of guidance where the sponsor is explicitly defined, and there's guidance for the sponsor. Mostly the descriptions of a sponsor is written from the project manager's perspective, in terms of, this is what you can expect from your sponsor. Your sponsor will give you this. If you've got this trouble, go and speak to your sponsor. So it's not really written or described or developed from the sponsor's perspective themselves. So we'll be having that presentation from Carl at the seminar. When you made the transition from project manager to sponsor, Carol, I just want to pick your brains on this. What was what sort of new skills did you feel you needed to develop? What was the big transition?
I think that the biggest transition for me was moving out of the doing and into the strategy, because I was still, I mean, I wasn't a particularly youngish person. I had quite a lot of work experience at that time, but I was used to doing things and being busy, and I'm a sort of classic completer finisher, busy worker. So actually moving to saying, some of the time that I spend thinking about how I help the team and talking to people and gathering support, that's as valuable as activity. It may look less productive to others and it may feel like it to me, but actually we have great project managers. My job is to let them do their job and me to do this strategic piece and the strategic alignment, and actually valuing that and moving into that space, rather than thinking, well, I can do thinking next week, but I can do things today. Because you're so used to, in that project space, being so focused on the end goal, that transition was a bit tricky. But it was good to be around quite a mature team of sponsors who I just saw them do it with such ease, and I started to see the difference it made, and thought, thinking and strategy are the value that I add here, not being an extra pair of hands in the project. And that was the biggest change to make, and the biggest realization to have.
Yeah, and that's fascinating, because that's really getting into the psyche of what it means to be a project manager versus what does it mean to be a sponsor. And one driven by if you like, the tangible signs of their work, and the other the enabling of their work. And yeah, so I've seen that in many cases where, you know, the output from an activity might be an option. An option to do something, and actually not taking the option is a valuable result, isn't it? You know, but it might not feel like it if you spent 6 months proposing a scheme, and then there's a decision not to go ahead, and actually that can be okay. You know, that means that as a sponsor you've provided all the necessary analysis, and the decision is not to go ahead with something. That's good sponsorship, but it doesn't feel like it if you come from a project management background where perhaps you'd fall onto being a position of advocacy, and the only result is to go ahead because you know, that's the tangible output of your work.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that, and it's probably the area of biggest and most difficult conflict between sponsors and project managers to work on together, because to the project manager, it feels like you're taking something away from them, almost as if, well, you haven't done a good job, so I'm cancelling this project, when really what you're saying is, great work, you've really helped us demonstrate that we should not go any further for whatever reason. And I think it's really current at the moment, because so many projects in so many industries, people are having to reevaluate, well, the need may no longer be there because the benefits may no longer be desired, because in a post-COVID world, actually maybe the benefits we need are something different. And I think I see a lot of tension around those relationships, and it's because you've got those different motivators, different drivers, but you're actually getting a great result when you don't waste money. You know, whether you're in the private or public sector, not wasting money on projects, it's good for your organisation, it's good for the planet. We don't need to build or create or change any more things that don't drive benefits. But really, really difficult work, such a difficult space for the two roles to be in.
That sort of then speaks to the development and, you know, pathways for sponsors, and how do we get, you know, the great sponsors that we need for the challenges that we've got ahead. And some of it is technical, but a lot of that will be experiential, won't it? And sort of behavioral aspects of the role.
Yeah, very much. And you really, you know, it's not a job that you want to ask someone who's just brand new to sponsorship and to working with people to pick up. You know, if they're in that space of having to bring a project to a close, as a more senior sponsor, you have to offer those people support, because when you cancel a project, you learn more about yourself than anything, because you have to step out of taking it personally. And remember, you were never there to win awards or cut ribbons. You were always there to make sure investments are chosen and delivered wisely. And you know, I think I say in the book, the best projects you deliver will be the ones that you stop from happening, because they no longer had the benefits or the strategic desires or stakeholder support or deliverability or business case. But yeah, it sounds very practical. Well, if there's no business case, we would immediately stop it. That's never been my experience. People get so wedded, you know, the fallacy of sunk costs and people trying to meet outturns, and also the political context. You know, politicians don't particularly love to celebrate cancelled projects. They would like you to save money or do it quicker. They don't necessarily love to say you're not doing it. So the sponsor is in that space all the time, and it is a difficult road to walk. Vastly rewarding, because you can look and think, I remember I helped people stop wasting money on that thing that we did not need or want, but really difficult work to do.
Other sort of tough, you know, aspects of sponsors that I've observed, and particularly in projects where, you know, there's sort of public money, and I think that's sort of the realm that we've just been discussing then as well. And like the Green Book applies, you know, the Treasury's Green Book, which is, you know, the basis upon which business cases are developed, and then the Treasury approval points are based upon. But we've got a 5 case model, and if you think about those 5 cases, there were almost 5 different people in terms of skill sets that are required in terms of like strategic, you know, top level helicopter thinking. And then you've got the management case, which is getting you into detail. You've got commercial, you know, these different aspects are quite different experience and skills and that are required. And yet we're asking a sponsor to oversee all of them, and that's why I think there's the element of like almost like the incomplete leader aspect, which is, you know, you need to know what you don't know, and then bring that expertise around you. And I guess the biggest skill is just the power of questioning, and not falling on making too many assumptions.
Yeah, and I think it's that you have to be really honest with yourself and look at those 5 cases, don't you, and say, which one of those do I immediately want to just, you know, remove because it's not my skill set? And then don't try and find someone who helps you with it. Try and find someone who's much better at it than you, that you know when you put all the parts together,
Yeah.
you get the great business case, because we're all going to have a weaker area or a blinder spot, but we just need someone that can plug that in for us, and then have that debate around it as well. You know, these business cases are big pieces of work, and the best ones I've seen are the ones where they've had multiple people inputting, and the sponsor really leading that team and leading from their base, but they've found, you know, a team of experts to help them with it.
It's sort of the alternative view to the incomplete leader is, you know, surround yourself with people so you're the weakest in the link. There you go, because you've got stronger links around you that can pull you through it. So tell us a little bit more about the book, Carol. What can people find or expect to see in it when they sort of get their copies? I know it's on Kindle, and there's also, is it a hardback or a paperback you can get as well?
It's in both, so it's on Kindle, it's in paperback, it's in hardback. It was interesting because when you go to work with an editor, and I described to the editor the book I wanted to write, she said, well, you can't possibly write that book, because what I wanted to talk about was the real challenges around the nuance of sponsorship and what I had learned, basically where I had gotten to almost after 20 years. And she said, so what's the book before that people would read? You know, where are you starting your text from? And I said, oh, we don't really have any. And like you said earlier, the research shows quite often what's happening is there's books that say to project managers, here's what your sponsor will be doing, here's what they expect. No one wrote that book and told the sponsors, therefore there's sometimes that disparity. And what the editor said to me is, you have to start from day one, and you have to write the absolute basics, and you have to take yourself back to what did you need to know and what were the things that were useful. So instead of having 50 topics, I had to pick what are the top 11 topics and start to write, okay, if you're starting from day one, and I think day one for some sponsors is still every new project you go on to. So we've talked about what should the role look like, putting in the context, and then talking through the key elements, and we've tried to give some top tips and some examples. I think a lot of people expected a lot of railway examples, but we've well, I say I wrote the book, not a we. I've used examples from different industries to show, I think in each industry we can get a little bit insular and think these problems only happen to us. You know, we get a little bit of exceptionalism going on. The reality is that a sponsor challenge in one industry is generally the same challenge elsewhere, because sponsors are rarely breaking through the technical challenges. They're breaking through all the other pieces, the governance, the assurance, the stakeholder management, aligning benefits with requirements, figuring out who's actually calling the shots. All of that contextually applies in every industry and every environment. So people didn't need stories about here's how you build the best bridge, or here's how you get the, you know, the best rail alignment. We actually have lots of, you know, text on those things. So this is much more about how can you actually frame this job for yourself and build your skill set as you go.
And there are different types of sponsors, aren't there? There's, like in the railway sector, as you mentioned, that there tends to be what I would call professional or dedicated sponsors, where the job title and the role are one and the same thing. And then in other organizations, someone is asked to sponsor a project because they might own the asset, or they might own the function or the operation that's going to be changed or affected by the project. So there's sort of different types of sponsors. And does your book sort of cover both types, if you're in the sort of where your job title and role is the same, or whether it's on top of a day job, if you like, or part of a day job, I should call it, rather than on top of. Does it apply to both of those?
It does apply. And we've talked a little bit about, I've heard in some circles the phrase executive sponsor and delegated sponsor. So we've used that terminology, but yeah, it really applies to anyone. And that's why I had to be quite strategic about writing it in a way that actually, whether you're that person who suddenly looked round and you had the sponsor file for a particular project landed on your desk, or whether you get up every day and you know you're a career sponsor and that's what you do. I had to write something that applied to both, because that's the help I wanted to give. Because again, it's the same challenges. We were speaking to an exec sponsor yesterday on a review. You know, she's at a very senior level. She's not in the detail. She's talking about the same challenges that a professional sponsor in a real project anywhere in the world would be talking about: strategic alignment, sticking to the scope, all of the same things.
Carol, I've got a curiosity, and then I'll move on to asking you some questions about our themes that we've got in the seminar that's coming up. So it relates to this skills bit. So in my observation, in terms of what makes a great sponsor, one of them, and my sample set is not necessarily massive, so it might be the sample, but it seems being Scottish is one of them. All the great sponsors I've worked with have been Scottish, but not everyone have that fortune of where they're born. So apart from being Scottish, what attributes that sort of you experience that make a great sponsor?
Maybe that'll be my next research project, will be why does being Scottish help you be a sponsor? I think there's certainly something about, as a people culturally, we're fairly forthright and not always uncomfortable with tension and conflict compared to maybe some other cultures. And actually getting comfortable with conflict is one of those things that you have to be able to do. It doesn't mean we want people going out and upsetting apple carts and creating conflict, but being able to have very difficult conversations, but in a managed way where you create a safe space to have those difficult discussions. That's how you're going to find out if your project's over budget, if things are running late. You have to create an environment where truth is something that is a comfortable dialogue for people by getting them through that sort of discomfort. And I think that's definitely key. Other skills I think you need are, I think you really need to be, I think you have to be a people person, but that also has to come with that edge of, we owe people the truth when we work in projects. So being a people person is really different from being a people pleaser in a sponsorship skill set. And really high levels of emotional intelligence and self-awareness are something that I see in the great sponsors that I've worked with. And a bit, I think, of natural charisma. The people that I've always role modelled and looked up to have been the people that have just been able to sort of win over a crowd, and create some credibility around actually the things that they say. I think the number one quality, I always say, don't hire sponsors for their technical skill set. Like, hire them for their values, because if the values don't fit your organisation, you've got the wrong sponsor in the wrong place. And the number one value for me is integrity. Like, they have to move with integrity through the project and the organisation at all times.
Yeah, that technical expertise bit is really interesting, because one of the things that we've been exploring around sponsors, and another theme of some seminars that the association's looked at, is around systems thinking, and projects exist in or often create systems and existing systems, and if you bring a specialist area of expertise or technical expertise to something, there's a tendency that you can end up focusing on one part of the system and not the complete system. And we know the whole system has to work, to get the full value out of the investments. But great, thanks for that, Carol. I would like to just move on to a couple of topics we've got coming up on in the seminar, and the title of the seminar is Fit for Future Sponsorship, which is, let's say we resolve the conundrum about what does the sponsor look like, what do they do, and we can develop the guidance for them. But what we don't want to do is to describe that based upon what we used to do, but thinking about what are the challenges going ahead. And there's two. We haven't picked all of those, so we've just picked two. And two things we know that are changing, and so therefore sponsors can make a bigger impact on, is the area of sustainability and also social value. So, and the theme that we're going to explore is, how do we go beyond the brief? How do we deliver? How do we get more from our projects without necessarily spending more? So, from your perspective, what can sponsors do in the world of, let's pick sustainability first and then move on to social value second. And you obviously gave an example, your own organisation, with the, can you travel, by public transport? But what is it that sponsors can do?
So sustainability is a really interesting one, partly because it's something I really care about, but also it's something I've watched very, very closely firsthand evolve over many years. And I remember in about 2006, we were in a public inquiry for a rail project, and it's myself and the project director and various other people giving evidence, repeatedly, and being cross-examined by barristers, because we were looking to take 2,000 people's homes. We were looking to have permission to create, massive disruption and build a railway. And I remember someone asking a question, one of the judicial people asking a question about our carbon footprint. That was very much the terminology at the time. And we all sort of thought, and as a team, you prepare heavily for these events. And I remember thinking, oh, we haven't prepped that question. And the project director said, well, we're building a railway, and railway is, more environmentally friendly than any other form of transport. And they all sort of nodded and went, okay, and moved on. We've not moved on that many years, and that would never be acceptable now. And I'm not saying that he did anything wrong. That was definitely the thinking. We could go into public environments and say, we're building public transport, therefore that equals sustainable practice. And that was very much accepted. Now we have to go much, much further. We have to actually do more thinking to prove that that is always the case, because it may not always be. And that for me is really something that a sponsor has got to lead. Like, you've got to stand up at the front and say, on this project, we are not looking to be compliant. We are looking to excel. We're looking to exceed expectations, because if the sponsor does not lead that value from the beginning, what you're telling your supply chain is either that compliance is okay, which means we're kind of doing this because we have to. So, do what you have to do to get the right consents and not cause too much trouble. Or you can lead from the front and say, we're going to build this project sustainably, and I want you to come and show us what that looks like. Now, in reality, that generally looks like a project that's under better control, has less impact on the public, and quite often saves you a lot of money, because we know that sustainable practice is generally very, very good business. I can't think of any exceptions. And I think the sponsor's role is to make sure that you set that context from the outset, because if you don't, that will trickle through the entire project, and you'll get what you asked for, even if you think you subtly asked for it.
Yeah, and the whole concept of sort of avoid, reuse, repurpose generally means that you're going to be doing less things, and you can deliver the same outcomes with with less cost and less environmental impact. So you say that sort of generally they go hand in hand, don't they, in terms of good practice.
Yes.
And let's turn our attention to social value. So my experience of social value, I've in prior roles I've done lots and lots of project reviews, and acted in an assurance capacity. And unfortunately, I see it sort of, I don't see the term come up too much through, if you like, in project documentation or in project conversations, until it gets to the procurement aspects and then the interaction with the supply chain. And it seems to be entirely, what's the supply chain going to do to get social value from the project, rather than what's the project going to do, what the sponsor's going to do to get social value from the project. So what can sponsors do in terms of increasing the social value of the projects that they're proposing and overseeing?
I think it's solving the problem exactly as what you say. This is not a supplier issue. If you're the client of a major project, even if you're a client on a project anywhere, you know that you're going to create some change and that you can actually do some good. Why would you leave it until you're almost on the verge of delivering it to start asking your supply chain to add it in? Where we see that happen, it's rarely very effective, and it becomes a little bit tokenistic. It becomes something that even supply chain providers who are really engaged with it, they're doing it at the last gasp when they're also about to start delivering a project. It's like any principle of good development. You have it in the beginning, you drive the project on that basis. And where we see it done well is where actually the client and the sponsor are working together to say, well, what is the social value we could create from this project? What do we want to create from this project? And how are we going to fund that? And again, you can actually get a lot of returns from doing that work upfront financially, whereas people push it into the supply chain and then they see it as a cost to do good. And you think, hang on, couldn't you do good just by policy and just by driving in some measures? And I think there's some real practical things they can do. For example, setting, well, what are the social value impacts you want to have specific to your project? So maybe we work internationally, so sometimes we see some really good work where people are looking at, well, what's the Indigenous nations engagement around that project? That's going to be our social value. Or maybe it's a major construction project and they think actually getting lots of small and medium enterprises engaged, that's going to be good. If you wait until you ask your supply chain to do that, it's too late. You have to start attracting them the minute you start thinking about it and saying, hey, we're going to want to work with you. How can we actually change us to make ourselves more attractive? And I see sometimes it's a jobs measure, and I come from a background of employability when I was in project management. jobs are not always the thing that are going to move people forward. Some people are so far removed from the labour market that creating jobs that you say are going to a certain postcode, you may as well put those jobs in the moon, because those people are so far removed that they are not going to turn up and you know, move into, say, schedule planning jobs, you know, from 3 generations of unemployment. But if you're being really targeted and saying, well, actually, we know the area we're in has these particular issues, what could we do? Oh, maybe you can actually create training opportunities, voluntary opportunities. Maybe you can do something where you fund programs and you create generational wealth around this and change people's opportunities. None of that you can ask your supply chain to do. They've got enough work to do procuring and delivering major projects and bringing them into use. So I think there's so much people can do, either as offset to the disruption, because there's a role to play in that too, or actually thinking about where is that social value impact we want to have and how do we have it. And there's some expert people in delivering social value. They just tend not to sit in project organisations. So the sponsors the role of saying, oh, hang on, we can't do this ourselves. Let's go out and get some expert advice and let's make this real. Because I can tell you from years of community work, people can spot a token gesture a mile away. And actually, you know, it's worse. You'd be better steamrolling through the whole place and pretending that, you know, acting like you don't care than pretending that you do, because you'll actually disengage people and you won't get any value from it. So I think, yeah, it's a massive role for the sponsor. I've tended to work on projects where you've had the ability to do that, and it's some of the most valuable work you can do.
Yeah, and thinking of the social value from the sponsor organisation perspective, and bringing them and getting involved, it sets the right tone, doesn't it, then, for all the others that then engage with the projects, if the sponsoring organisation's doing it as well. Great. Well, I'm sure we're going to have some really good conversations when we delve into this topic deeper on the 13th of June. Carol, that's been brilliant. I can't believe half an hour has just whizzed by already. That it feels like we're only just getting going in our conversation. So thank you very much. Well, it just leaves it to me to say thank you for your time and taking it out ahead of your trip to Italy. Hope it's successful, and I hope you get plenty of downloads. Let's hope we get more Kindle's views rather than the hardback copies of your book. But wish you all the success for that, and hopefully we'll follow up soon, Carol, and get you involved in more MPA activities as well. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for having me, Andy. Always a pleasure.